My name is Andy. I'm a retired DJ. So yeah, my ears are very important to me. I have a big passion for music, but definitely feel that the kind of exposure to those loud sounds has given me hearing loss. I really struggle in sort of busy bars and cafes, and actually that's motivated me to found a company called eargym. We help people prevent avoidable hearing loss as well as improve their hearing ability. So I'll be hosting today and asking questions to our resident expert, Madison. So yeah, Madison, do please say hello, introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you for that. So I'm Madison and I am the audiologist at eargym, but alongside that, I also do work clinically as an NHS audiologist, and I have done for a number of years now. So I'm very excited for today. And once again, happy World Hearing Day to everyone. Yeah,
well said. It is World Hearing Day. It's what this is all about. And noticed a few more people just jumped in. So welcome to you. We've literally just started. We just made some introductions. And yeah, we will be answering your questions today. We've had quite a few come in on email, so we'll be talking about those. But yeah, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask Madison, do put them in the Q&A, and we've got a slot at the end to sort of look at those. So yeah, let's get started. It's World Hearing Day. So World Hearing Day, if you've not heard of it, it's an initiative by the World Health Organization to raise awareness about hearing. So our hearing connects us to the world, it connects us to the people we care about. It's kind of obvious when you think about it, but it's a very important part of our lives. And yeah, ultimately we could do more to look after it. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today. And I certainly wish I'd shown my ears more respect in my DJ days. And I think World Hearing Day has come about because the World Health Organization are really worried about hearing health. They've done some research which has shown some alarming results. So yeah, I'm going to just talk about a little bit about the sort of history and the sort of messages they're sort of talking about to set the context for today on why we should be addressing hearing health. So globally, hearing loss is a really big problem, and unfortunately it's on the rise. So it's estimated that there are about 1.5 billion people around the world with hearing loss, and about a third of those have a disabling level of hearing loss. So that means it's impacting their health on a daily basis. And for context, in the UK, there's sort of about 12 million people with hearing loss. And it's unfortunately expected to grow 22% in the next 8 years, 63% in the next 50 years. So that would be 2.5 billion people with hearing loss by 2050. And of course, a big reason for that is we've got a growing population, and the population is aging, but there are other factors that are coming into play as well. So if we look at the UK, 1 in 6 people of working age are affected by hearing loss on a daily basis, and 50% of people under the age of 35 are at risk of avoidable hearing loss from listening too loud. And I think this is a big factor that's playing into that kind of estimated growth of hearing loss. Everybody's got a smartphone, and even the basic smartphone come with a set of headphones which have the power to do damage to your ears, and not many people are aware of that. So we're definitely going to be talking about that today. And yeah, I found a survey that suggested that 80% of people in the UK had never had a hearing test, compared to about 13% of eyesight. And I know most people I speak to go to the dentist reasonably regularly, but yeah, I've often never had a hearing test. So yeah, there's a definite feeling of kind of why do we neglect this part of our lives. So we're going to do a very quick poll today, just to see, have you ever had a hearing test? I will launch the poll. So hopefully that's come up on your screen. Let's see, thank you. All right, so we've got 80% of people have had a hearing test, so it's the other way around. But yeah, I think there was a study by RNID this year that showed 6% of people in the UK had a hearing test in the last 12 months of people who, yeah, were undiagnosed with hearing loss. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see your questions at the end. But yeah, that's great. Well done. That's one of the first things, to do. So moving on, the World Health Organization are addressing, this issue in many ways, but awareness is, where it starts. And it's one of the key messages revolve around three areas: that you can have good hearing throughout your life, which is obviously great news. There are many the many causes of hearing loss that can be prevented, which is also good news. That's a big reason why we do these webinars. And safe listening, as I mentioned, should be something we're all aware about. So we're going to touch on that a little bit today. But ultimately, the message is to be proactive. It sounds like a lot of you are being, which is great. So look after your ears. If you have hearing issues, don't ignore it. And this year, they're encouraging people into primary care. So trying to get across that here in the UK, your GP is a good source of the first step and can help you get advice. And there are lots of audiologists like Madison who real experts in hearing and can help you get the help. So today we're going to talk about what your options are in the UK for getting help. We're going to answer your questions. So yeah, do send in. If you've got any, we have some to answer that have been emailed in already. But yeah, this year the World Health Organization have shared some handy tips for healthy ears. So we'll have a quick look at that. And I think Madison, you're definitely more qualified to talk about this. So over to you.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, the World Health Organization has put out, some very helpful tips for healthy ears and safe listening even. So to kick it off, the first one, just continuing on from what Andy's already spoken on, is try and use earplugs when you're in noisy places, if at all possible. Noise-induced hearing loss is incredibly preventable, so it's always helpful to just pop those in if you have them on hand. But on the flip side of that, aside from, hearing protection or maybe headphones, try not to stick anything in your ears. So no cotton buds or sticks to try and get wax out. Wax is a healthy part of the ear canal to a certain extent. And the ears are actually designed to clean themselves. So if you do end up using anything like cotton buds, you might actually end up pushing the wax in deeper. And the deeper part of the ear canal is not actually as efficient at self-cleaning. So it might end up being trapped for longer and end up being more impacted. So if you do have any concerns about wax, it's best to just consult your GP first. Similar to that, we always recommend that you check your hearing regularly. And I think also your ears, as we said, noise-induced hearing loss is preventable. It's always nice to have someone to have a look inside your ears just to see how things are going. Now, this next one, swimming in contaminated water, although it might seem obvious why this is maybe not recommended for other health reasons, when we look at the ears, you have to consider that dark, moist environment is pretty ideal for, bacteria breeding grounds. So if you have any of that contaminated water trapped inside your ears, you are at a real increased risk of developing an ear infection, which can not only be painful, but it can affect your hearing as well. Now, if you're someone who's been prescribed hearing aids, it's typically recommended, you can always speak to your audiologist, but typically recommended that you wear your hearing aids as much as possible. And this is because the brain does take some time to adapt and get used to the hearing aids. So if you're only wearing them when you think you need them, and it's just selective, you're unlikely to be giving your brain enough time to get used to them, which means you're likely not even perceiving the full benefit that the hearing aids can provide in those important situations. Now, this other which was don't share kind of earplugs or earphones, is one that, as a teenager, I would always share headphones with my friends. We would listen to things together. I didn't think much about it, but it really can increase your risk of infection, especially if the other person's prone to infection. So it's helpful just to use your own or, thoroughly sanitize them before you're going to share them or borrow them from a friend or lend them to a friend. For the same reason that, I would never use the same piece of equipment to look in one person's ear into another person's ear in clinic. It's just not hygienic and it can increase your risk of infection. The bottom two. So, we always recommend if you have any concerns about your hearing or your ear health to consult your doctor. So it's estimated that nearly 60% of hearing and ear problems can actually be identified and addressed at the primary care level. And finally, we obviously, and World Health Organization recommend that you do not listen to any loud music or sounds, especially for prolonged periods of time, for reasons we've already touched on, and for reasons that we'll bring up throughout the rest of this presentation as well. So try to keep your music to, a reasonable volume.
Yeah, thank you, Madison. Yeah, we're certainly not going to be saying don't listen to music, because it's, you know, such a big part of the enjoyment in life, certainly for me. But I'm definitely guilty of on the loud music front. And yeah, I just never knew that it could be doing permanent damage. I guess ultimately I knew it wasn't good for my ears, but I didn't know about all the impact that it could have. So I think the difference change that I'd have made would be to have worn protection. I don't think I'd have stopped DJing, but yeah, wearing protection in nightclubs, you know, nightclubs of the power, sort of in 10-15 minutes to damage your ears at sort of electronic dance music kind of average levels. And for £12 you can buy a set of protection that can let you feel the music, enjoy the experience, get the good quality sound, but just, yeah, listen safely for, you know, up to 8 hours. And something I've changed recently, actually, after speaking to Madison a lot, is just having breaks. I always used to have music on the whole time, but actually silence is good for the ears. Let all those hair cells rest and stop stimulating the brain as well, and actually get that rest time. So yeah, if you're interested in protection, eargym actually talking to a few suppliers about having some discounts, so we'll be sharing some details on that. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in that. And yeah, actually on headphones itself, the 60-60 rule is a really good example of how to sort of listen safely. So don't have your device's volume louder than 60% of the volume, and then take a break before sort of 60 minutes. So that's a really good tip. So most headphones go up to sort of 100 decibels, 110 decibels, some of them. And that's like being in a nightclub standing right by the speakers. And the thing with headphones is they direct the sound. They're, you know, they're about this far away, a few millimeters away from your actual eardrum. So yeah, that's not good at all. But I could sort of compare it to, you can buy a car that will do 200 miles an hour, but you're only allowed to drive at 70. That's very similar with headphones, but there's no legal restrictions on listening to headphones at the moment. Although I know Apple and Google are doing some useful things with their phones to sort of show you what's safe and what's not. So 60-60 rule is a good guide, and take lots of breaks. So finally, before we get onto your questions, we're just going to look at some of the signs of hearing loss and the impact it has on our lives, because most of the signs are obvious, but actually hearing loss is harder to spot than, say, eyesight issues, especially on the milder side, which can creep up on you. So Madison, what are the sort of some of the signs and some of the key points here?
Yeah, so some of the biggest signs and symptoms that I see in clinic are, you know, the big one is difficulty in groups of people or in crowds with a lot of background noise. So difficulty with that cocktail party effect, which just means, you know, your ability to kind of separate the background noise from what you want to listen to. A lot of people will struggle with that. Similarly, they'll struggle with the clarity of speech. So they'll say things along the lines of, you know, I know people are talking to me. I can definitely hear you. It's just, I don't always get every bit of what you're saying, or it's not as clear as maybe it once was. And so those are probably the two biggest symptoms of hearing loss that I see from patients. And what ends up happening is you end up having to use more cognitive resources in your brain and other contextual cues to kind of figure out what is being said if you have a hearing loss. And when you draw on those cognitive resources, you end up experiencing this fatigue if it's sustained over time. So a lot of people feel this brain fatigue maybe after they've, you know, had a night out with friends at a restaurant. They'll feel a lot more exhausted than maybe they previously would have. And what can end up happening for a lot of people is that they slowly start to step back from these social situations because they're all of a sudden becoming a lot more exhausting than they once were. And this can eventually over time result in feelings of loneliness and even for some people, depression. And all of these things can have such a massive impact on a person's quality of life. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, the brain fatigue one is always the one that really surprises me and kind of makes sense. So that sort of straining to listen.
Yeah, it's quite subtle as well. You don't always know why you're experiencing it.
Yeah. So all just points to being sort of proactive, and if you're noticing things, do something about it. But yeah, let's dive into some of the questions. So I guess, quick caveat, we're on Zoom. We can share, Madison can share her knowledge and experience and information, but yeah, just a bit of a caveat, this is not medical advice. If you are concerned, the sort of core message is go and see your GP, get some face-to-face help. Yeah, that would be the best course of action. But it leads us nicely into our first question, which was sent in on email by Jane, I think. I'm noticing my hearing changing. What should I do?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question. And it's one that I get a lot from other people in my personal life as well. And my recommendation is always, it's just good to have your ears and your hearing checked by a health professional. So in an ideal world, it's helpful to have your ears checked first. And this is because if you have an excessive amount of wax or maybe even infection, this can cause a temporary hearing loss. So in this instance, if you're able to see your GP, they can advise you on how to proceed to remove the wax or to treat the infection, which usually requires some type of medication. But if you go and they say there's no obvious signs of wax or infection and you're still concerned about your hearing, then you would definitely benefit from a hearing test. Or if those issues are resolved and you're still concerned about your hearing, I would still recommend a hearing test. So you can always start by doing a hearing check at home. So for instance, within the eargym app, we have a handful of useful hearing assessments, and these can give you an indication about whether you have a hearing loss or not. So that they're not going to be able to tell you how much of a hearing loss you have, and it's not the same as a full hearing test that you would have done in clinic, but it's always a very helpful place to start, especially if you're unsure. And in the UK, if you want to access an NHS audiologist, you have to have a referral from your GP. So sometimes going to your GP with these preliminary hearing check results can be helpful to kind of aid in that referral. But if you don't want to go through your GP or you don't want to be seen on the NHS, you can also look at private or high street audiology clinics because they're self-referral. Whilst a lot of high street clinics offer free hearing tests, just be aware that not all private, independent clinics will. So there may be a fee associated with this. But yes, I always recommend have your ears looked at and a hearing test if you're still concerned.
Yeah, brilliant. Specsavers and Boots are sort of the common ones, aren't they? Sort of in a lot of the high streets. There's loads more, and lots of local ones which should be supported, of course. But yeah, we've had a question from Susan come in literally just now. Really good question. How can you determine the volume of earphones that just has a sliding dial? I'm thinking about my son playing computer games when I'm not hearing the level myself. So yeah. There's two things, I guess, a sliding dial on the computer to sort of show where the volume's at, and potentially that some headphones have that sliding dial for volume. I guess halfway is a really good spot. In fact, I have an Apple Mac computer, and it's got a sort of sliding dial, like little notches. I try and aim for about a third. If you can hear what your son is hearing outside of his headphones, that's going to be way too loud, I would say. So yeah, 50% down to 30% is probably a kind of good guide. Would you think, Madison?
Yeah, I mean, even though that 60 rule is there, I would always still try to aim a little bit lower just so you can, definitely make sure that you're safe. And yeah, sometimes it has to be a little bit of an estimate by just looking at the scale and filling it up to 30 to 50%.
Yeah, we got a great sort of half question, really interesting point from Roland. My Apple Watch regularly flags up 90 plus decibels while attending spin class at my Virgin gym. I have tinnitus, so do wear concert earplugs to protect my ears, but I worry about others in the class. Should the gym be monitoring and reducing their sound systems to ensure they're not damaging people's ears?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I don't know what the rules are in the UK, unfortunately, in terms of shops and commercial spaces monitoring the sound levels. I'm pretty sure there should be something, though, that you can't exceed. But yes, they definitely should be, because it's just not it.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any rules in place, Andy, in the UK specifically.
There are guidelines from HSE, but yeah, I mean, nightclubs can kind of do what they want, really.
Yeah.
I know the World Health Organization have a Make Listening Safe campaign where they are actively setting guidelines for venues. And there was some really interesting information that came out from the UK's Hearing Conservation Society recently, assessing hearing levels, and it had showed that the average volume in restaurants had become more comfortable.
Yeah.
But generally, I think nightclubs and bars and things were getting louder.
Yeah.
So it is coming. And I think, yeah, Virgin, you know, their branding is rockstar treatment, isn't it? And I think that's what you're getting there. But amazing role in you're using the function on the Apple Watch. It's got a good feature for flagging it up, and wearing protection is exactly the right thing to do. Yeah, they should absolutely kind of be. I'm not sure the exact timing at 90 decibels, because although 90 sounds very close to 100, it's not 10% higher. It's the way decibels work is it's quite a lot louder at 10 decibels more, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a logarithmic scale. So
there's probably a period of time that 90 decibels is not causing damage. But yeah, I imagine spin class goes on for sort of at least half an hour. So yeah, it is coming. I think it is the next step. There are a lot of people behind the scenes working on how to guide nightclubs and venues and things. So yeah, thanks, Roland. Really, really good point. Next question we have is from John. This is all about tinnitus. So yeah, John says he has tinnitus. I'm sorry to hear that. It takes the form of a high-pitched whistle. When I've had a hearing test, I was told I have normal hearing loss for my age, in that I miss some high-frequency sounds. I wonder if that's because I can't distinguish the test tones from my normal tinnitus. Is there a way to tell whether it's just tinnitus that's the problem, or does it not matter? As there's also a less significant question attached to that. Why does the pitch and volume of my tinnitus change markedly if I grip my teeth on either side? Fascinating question. Maybe we should sort of start for the group with what is tinnitus and answer John's questions.
yes. So to start, tinnitus is a sensation of hearing a sound when there's no external source for that sound. So nobody else is going to hear the tinnitus that an individual experiences except for that individual. And a lot of people do describe it as this high-pitched ringing noise, but tinnitus is very unique to the person experiencing it. So it can sound like buzzing, hissing, a heartbeat, whistling, or many other noises. And the tinnitus that you hear and the volume of it can actually vary from one moment to the next. So going back to the original question about, possibly maybe missing some tones during a hearing test because of the tinnitus, that is a great question. Now, I know most of the people here have had a hearing test, it seems like, but maybe for those who haven't, during a hearing test, you're essentially asked to, press a button or raise your hand whenever you hear a tone. And so depending on what your tinnitus sounds like, it can definitely be a little bit more difficult to tell the difference between the tone that's being presented and your own tinnitus. And, it's actually not that uncommon for someone to press the button in response to their own tinnitus. However, audiologists are very well trained in administering this test, and we have numerous checks to make sure that the responses you're providing are reliable. So it does seem unlikely that the high frequency hearing loss you might have been told that you have is due to, you missing it or not being able to tell the difference between the tinnitus. But of course, if you ever have concerns, even during the hearing test, even for those who maybe will get a hearing test in the future, don't hesitate to ask the audiologist. And, it's always helpful to let them know maybe when you're struggling with the tinnitus, and there's other things that they can do to make the test easier. So we can try a different tone to see if that's helpful to distinguish from the tinnitus.
Yeah, really good question. Thanks, John. We do have a John in the group, so I wonder if that's you. It'd be interesting to know if you've done the ear age test, and if your hearing is sort of correct for your ear age. Which if it is, I guess, yeah, there's little to worry about from a hearing loss point of view at this stage. But taking that steps to protection would be good advice.
Yeah,
I imagine if you've done if you've seen an audiologist and you were missing a very specific tone that your tinnitus is at, you'd have this big notch out of that at that frequency, and if you haven't got that, then would suggest they're not conflicting. Interestingly, we came across a new service for tinnitus. There's two. We came across a new one, Tinnybot it's called. It's on the App Store. I think you get a free trial, and that looks like a good service for people with tinnitus. There's I think there's Otto. Is it Otto Health, the other one?
I'm not too sure. I know the Tinnitus one because it's based off cognitive behavioral therapy, I think is what it's based off, which CBT and hearing aids are the only two treatments that have enough research to suggest that they are effective and safe methods to help manage your tinnitus.
Yeah. So Tinnybot's worth looking at, I think. And yeah, John is here. Good to see you.
Wonderful.
Thank you for coming.
And I think John had a second part to that question about.
Oh yeah, about if he grits his teeth. The sound changes, which
so this was
fascinating
and a very interesting one. And so we have to look at the joint, the temporomandibular joint, or the TMJ. And there seems to be a very close relationship between having problems with this TMJ and tinnitus. So studies have actually shown that people who have problems with TMJ are more likely to have tinnitus, and that, like John experiences, they're able to change the volume and maybe the sound of their tinnitus when they move their mouths or the jaw. So there's a few theories around this. I'm not going to dive into them, but they mostly revolve around the fact that the muscles and ligaments around TMJ connect to or are very close to some of the muscles in the middle ear space. So it seems to be there's some connection there. So I'm not saying this is definitely what is causing John to be able to modulate his tinnitus like this, but if it sounds like something that might be impacting you, it's always worth speaking to your GP, or even in this case, your dentist, because I think getting a handle on those TMJ problems could possibly help with the tinnitus as well. But again, you'll have to speak to either your GP or, in this case, your dentist.
Yeah,
very interesting one.
John's passing on his thanks for the answer. Excellent. So next question. Do I need hearing aids? Well, how would I know if I need hearing aids?
So this one, I wish I had more of an answer for everyone, but the only way to know if you're going to need hearing aids is have an assessment with an audiologist. The audiologist can make a recommendation for hearing aid or hearing aids based off the results of your hearing test, but we do also consider other factors such as, how your hearing loss is actually affecting your ability to communicate and hear. But unfortunately, I can't give any more insight than that. But always encourage you to get a hearing test. Yeah,
if you think you might, just get an assessment and get the advice is the answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we had a question from a Johnny, I think, so probably a different Johnny. What is the situation in my ears if I cannot hear anything, even if I have hearing aids in?
Yeah, so I've had this one a few times in clinic, so I'm unfortunately going to give.
Well, that's good. I was quite concerned about that, so you're going to know.
Yeah, but I'm going to have to start this off similar to the previous one, in that only really your own audiologist can address this question for you, because it's going to involve a few more questions and answers. A bit more of a conversation needs to be had, and it's even helpful to listen to your hearing aids. So anytime I see a patient, if they come in, I'll have a listen to their hearing aids. I don't put them in. There's a way for me to do it. But if it's a case of your hearing aids aren't improving the clarity of speech for you, so you don't notice much benefit, again, I encourage you to go back to your audiologist, because hearing aids are very high-tech, advanced pieces of technology, and there are a number of things that your audiologist can do to help you. If it's a case of you feel like your hearing aid suddenly stopped working, that can also happen because if they need to be cleaned, repaired, serviced. Or if you feel like your hearing has suddenly changed and now you can't hear anything, if that's the case, I would urge you to seek medical advice. So if it's a case of suddenly I woke up and I can't hear anything anymore, I would urge you to speak to a doctor.
Yeah. I've heard a company talking recently. They're trying to bring out really good hearing aid technology at a lower price point, which is needed. But just saying, it can take people up to 3 months to get used to their hearing aids, to kind of get the settings right. And I think there are a lot of forums online about how you can do that yourself if you feel comfortable with technology. But if not, you've got to keep going back to your audiologist and refine the settings. And there's a lot you can do with that. So perhaps that's going to help. I guess it's personalization of the technology to your needs, really.
Yeah. And one thing I will say with hearing aids, It's a tricky one. It's a bit of a science and an art. So the more information that a patient can provide me, the more I'm able to help you. So I always tell my patients, if we're having a bit of a tough go with it, we're having some teething problems, go out and wear them in the real world and make notes about what's not working, what's working, because as I said, the more information you can provide me about, the detailed situations where you're struggling, I can take that information and use that to make the changes. If you just kind of say you're struggling, we don't really know where to begin. So the more information, the better.
Yeah. And obviously you have to charge hearing aids, which probably, an obvious one, but my father, that was one of the things he really struggled with when he got his, was getting used to charging them every night so they were ready in the morning and working well. Anyway, let's move on. We had another question from Andrada, who's actually been one of our testers. So yeah, really good to see you here today. Thank you for joining us. So she's saying, I feel or hear water in my ear. I had an ear infection before and got antibiotics, and the pain was gone after the antibiotics, but this water feeling is still here. My GP is not really attentive or caring. I'm considering changing the GP. Until I do, is this something to be worried about? My hearing feels muffled a little in that my ear as well, but not much in the other.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So unfortunately, without being able to have a look inside your own ear, I can't say much, but I do think it's worth, persisting with your GP, because I think it's worth someone having a look. And especially if there's a difference in the two ears, it could be that there's still an infection, or sometimes a feeling of, having bunged up, muffled hearing can also just be a symptom of hearing loss as well. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case here, but I think I would be pushing to see your GP again, and if possible, being seen by ENT or an audiologist. I think it's worth persisting, but it doesn't sound like anything sinister, possibly just residual infection or hearing loss in that ear. Yeah,
so I know in the UK there are lots and lots of very, very good GPs, but sometimes they obviously have to cover a whole range of issues. So yeah, not all of them know a lot about hearing. It's a very specialist thing, isn't it? So can you go to a GP and say assertively that you'd like to see an ENT sort of specialist, or how would you talk to the GP and to get that to happen?
I think it's going to be different for every GP and every trust. There's different protocols, different standards. I think if I was concerned, I would just be saying, I still feel muffled. I still feel like I only have a reduced hearing in this one ear. What can you do for me? Can I be seen by an audiologist? Or if they think ENT, yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I think you probably reiterate it's causing you some anxiety about the issue, about whether there's still an infection there, and yeah, if it's affecting your daily life, then you can say, yeah, you want to do something about it. So yeah, I used to go swimming a lot, and that feeling of water in the ear or hearing that water in the ear, I absolutely hate that. So yeah, I hope you get that sorted, Andrada. And yeah, really thank you for your question. So we had a couple more. Let's have a look. Yeah, I go clubbing a lot. Is that dangerous? That was one that came in from a Richard.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously everyone can enjoy a night out or nights out, that's fine. But I think we do need to think about how, in the clubbing environment, how loud music can damage our hearing. We've touched on this briefly already, but in our hearing organ, we have these cells, and they're called hair cells, and they kind of look like little strands of hair that stand up. And they are responsible for detecting sound and converting it into a signal that the brain receives. Now, these hair cells can be quite vulnerable and damaged when listening to loud sounds, which would be found in most nightclubs. So when you're exposed to this over a couple of hours, the hair cells almost become a little overstimulated, and this can result in a temporary hearing loss. So you might notice if you leave a nightclub after a couple of hours, everything might seem a little dull. You might notice a little bit more tinnitus, but the hair cells can actually recover. And this can happen over the course of a few hours to up to 3 days. But If you continually do this to the hair cells, they will lose that ability to recover. And what happens is they eventually stop working, and then the hearing loss due to the noise can become permanent. So as we've already said multiple times, we encourage you to wear earplugs especially if you're on a night out. If you find yourself on a night out unexpectedly, it's always worth going to the bartender and asking, do they have any earplugs? They often have disposable earplugs on hand that they can give out, because I think they're required to have them for at least their staff, but usually they're happy to give them out. Also, just think about where you're standing. If you're in a nightclub, stand away from the speakers, because that distance is going to give you a little bit of a reduced exposure. And as we've said before, try and take regular breaks, even if it's just to go nip to the loo, stand outside for a few moments, just to give your ears a bit of a break.
Yeah, that earplug tip's a really good one. And yeah, they're not the best quality, those foam ones, are they? But there's a lot on the market of literally they're designed to let all frequencies in at a much reduced decibel level, so you still get the good quality. And dance music, a lot of it's about feeling the music, not necessarily overloading the ears with really, really loud. So if you're going a lot, I think the consensus is you should definitely wear protection and take some breaks.
Yeah.
And that point about temporary tinnitus, I remember a lot going to bed after a night out and you can just hear ringing in the ears. So I never thought it was a sort of basic tinnitus. And I guess what's also interesting, I've heard a lot of people in the industry talking about hidden hearing loss, where the sensitivity of hearing tests is very hard to pick up at the very high frequencies that you might have, the hearing might be going, but also that the damage can happen at a time that would then mean that your hearing test result was normal. But fast forward a few years, that damage has then permeated into the system, and the damage has been done in the past, but it's a years later that it actually shows up on a hearing test. So there's so much unknown about hearing that I think it's good to be cautious, would be my advice. So I think we've got one more question. So we're going to wrap up pretty soon. If you've got any more questions, do stick them on the chat and we'll get around to them. But we had a question for Numa, which is a really interesting one. It would be useful to be given one's hearing number. I learned of this only through reading a library book, not from my NHS Audiology service.
Okay, so I'm going to have to assume here that when you say your hearing number, you're referring to your average hearing threshold. So I'll explain it a little bit. When you have a hearing test, your audiologist will measure what is the quietest sound that you can hear at least 6 different frequencies in the ear. We then calculate the average across those 6 frequencies for each ear, and that gives us your average hearing threshold. And we use this average number to determine the degree or the severity of the hearing loss. So if your average falls between, let's say, 21 to 40 decibels, that's considered a mild hearing loss. Now, I would note here, these are just clinical terms that we use, and they're not at all reflective of an individual's experience with hearing loss. So some people with mild hearing loss feel like the hearing has, much more of a severe impact on their hearing, their listening, and their quality of life. Whereas maybe someone with more of a moderate to severe hearing loss feels relatively unaffected by it. So I can see it's interesting to definitely have access to this average hearing threshold, and you should have access to it, but I wouldn't, read into it too much. More the label, so the mild, moderate, severe, profound, it doesn't have to define your experience with hearing loss. But as I said, it's always nice to have access to this information. So you should be able to, at your next audiology appointment, you can ask the audiologist for this number or for a copy of the results of your hearing test, and they should give it to you. You do have the right to that information.
Yeah, thanks, Madison. Good answer, and it actually leads on really nicely to how I kind of want to wrap this up by talking a little bit about eargym. I know many of you here are eargym users, so a big thanks to you guys. You're some of our early adopters and helping us address these issues, and that's one of our goals really, is to try and make the world of hearing testing really simple, really clear, let you own your own hearing data and kind of make the choices about what you want to do with it as easy as possible. So we've got a long way to go, but yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the app and how it stands at the moment, and also, yeah, let you know how you can get a free hearing test. So I started eargym out of frustration that there wasn't much out there to help people with hearing health. I didn't feel like I was ready or needed hearing aids, but I wanted to do something proactive to kind of prevent further issues in later life. So yeah, eargym is helping people keep good hearing as well as improve their hearing. And the app includes 3 free hearing tests. And each of those tests comes with a set of personalized advice based on the results. So those 3 tests are designed to give you a thorough all-round hearing checkup. We've got the 60-second ear age test, and that checks for age-related decline, as some of you may have done when we started. We have a hearing loss screener test, and that can give you good advice on whether you are likely to have hearing loss and should go and see an audiologist or not. And we have a deeper dive questionnaire that assesses the impact that your hearing health might be having on your quality of life. And that's again another really good one to sort of advise on what you should do about it. There's lots of guidance on safe listening and hearing hygiene. There's lots of good content. And we're one of the first companies to pioneer a unique approach into improving hearing called hearing training. As some of you have been playing our hearing training games. They involve interactive exercises designed to stimulate the parts of the brain responsible for hearing. So the brain is a bit like a muscle. You can train it to get better at processing sound. We can't reverse what's happening to the ear, but we can help the brain adapt to what's happening in the ear. And yeah, we're playing a big part in that and doing a lot of research into that. And we've designed a game that helps you hear in noise, hear what people are saying in noise. We've got another kind of all-round hearing workout, kind of sort of stimulates the whole auditory system. And we've got another game that's very connected to parts of the brain responsible for auditory memory, which is, yeah, a really good brain workout if you're trying to keep your brain active for kind of good long-term brain health. So yeah, finally you can try these games and get a free hearing health check in the app. And if you haven't got the app already, this QR code will give you 2 weeks free trial of the training and then 50% off as a special World Hearing Day offer. Feel free to take a screenshot, share it with friends and family. We are going to wrap up there. So just want to say a huge thanks for joining us. Thanks for some great questions. We have recorded today, so we'll be sharing that so we can share that advice to other people as well. And yeah, happy World Hearing Day. Thank you very much for listening. I'm just going to go off camera, but I'll leave this QR code up for a couple of minutes so you can get the app if you'd like to. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Madison.
Oh, thank you. And happy World Hearing Day, everyone.